Across 1,000 years of war, loyalty, migration, faith, and survival, one family moved through the shifting landscapes of medieval Europe and the emerging Atlantic world. From Norman courts to Celtic frontiers, from royal service to colonial hardship, the PAYNE family stood at the crossroads of history. You're listening to Domesday to America, a documentary series tracing the PAYNE family across 1,000 years, from Celtic prehistory to the Atlantic world. In this opening episode, we begin not with conclusions, but with the questions that set the entire project in motion.
Welcome to another episode of In Depth with Academia. I'm Richard Price, founder and CEO of Academia.edu, and today I'm really excited to dive into a sweeping, intricate, honestly kind of mind-boggling historical investigation, one that goes from medieval Normandy to colonial America. We're talking about the paper Domesday to America, tracing the PAYNE legacy across Normandy, England, Ireland, and the English Atlantic colonial world by Patrick Payne. And before I go any further, quick reminder, everything I share today comes straight from the paper itself. My job is just to explain and interpret, not to endorse or challenge any claims. These are academic insights and hypotheses, not absolute facts, so just keep that in mind as we go. So, what's the big question Payne is wrestling with here? Basically, who were the Paynes? Were they just a bunch of random folks who happened to share a surname? Payne, Payne, Paynell, Pagan, Fitzpayne, Paganel, and so on? Or was this a tightly knit dynastic network stretching back before the Norman conquest through England, Ireland, and on into the English Atlantic world? Was the Payne family just a surname, or did it mark out a genuine multi-century kind of power network? Why does this matter? Well, surnames carry stories, but also family alliances, transfers of land and power, and the roots of entire communities across continents. Understanding how these kinds of families worked can shed light on how social structures and even colonial empires were built, not by nameless masses, but through networks and legacy and, sometimes sheer stubborn tenacity. So what does Payne actually do in the paper? He uses a combo of historical records, medieval charters, DNA surname projects, R1b if you're a genetics buff, manuscripts, and a whole lot of genealogical reasoning to try to map out who the Paynes really were and where they came from. One of the core arguments is that many Paynes weren't just disconnected people with a common last name. Instead, a lot of them seem to descend from pre-conquest families in Normandy, possibly of Romanized or Celtic stock, who were then, Normanized when the Vikings arrived. Rather than blonde, tall Vikings, Payne argues the original Paynes were more likely to have been short, maybe dark-haired, maybe even red-haired Celts or Gaels. And there's an entire section about DNA evidence, but as is often the case with big haplogroups, it's kind of inconclusive so far. Digression alert here. Payne gets fascinated by the pagan part of the surname, connecting it to the term pagus, which was a sort of Roman or Frankish word for district or region. It's a wild etymological ride. At one point he suggests that adding L to the surname might have been a way to signal Christian adoption, L as in God, which, wow, what a rabbit hole. But it shows just how much meaning can be packed into not just what a family did, but in the very name they carried. Throughout that big Norman English transition, families like the Paynes were deeply involved in all layers of society: royal service, landholding, marriage alliances, and more. You get stories about Ranulph the Moneyer, Minters, landholders in Norfolk, then John Payne, chief butler of England under Henry IV, showing up in critical historical moments: crusades, new kings crowned, all that good medieval drama. And then you have wild ties to Geoffrey Chaucer and even Dr. John Wycliffe. So you have literature, religious reform, you name it. So what about the Atlantic connection, the America bit in the title? Payne traces how the network of Paynes and their relatives, Butler, Lacy, Clare, Chaucer, various others, helped populate and shape these early colonies. There's this idea that the same family webs underpinning English towns and royal households ended up sending descendants to Jamestown, Roanoke, and later Massachusetts and Virginia. Sometimes it's speculation based on fragmentary records, but it's always rooted in some kind of source: wills, charters, land grants, even the provenance of precious manuscripts. And what does this all mean for you, the listener? Well, The PAYNE story tells us that genealogies aren't just paper trails, they're living networks. Your own family might have echoes of these migrations and alliances. It also shows, in a big way, that who we think we come from and how is shaped by which stories and which records survive. Oh, one other thing. Academic history always comes with its share of uncertainty. PAYNE stresses repeatedly that we may never have the DNA links to confirm every theory. Much of his argument is built on patterns, repeated associations, and, honestly, a fair amount of detective work. But that's part of what makes history super fun. It's about the questions as much as the answers. So, as we wrap up, if you've ever wondered just how a surname connects with centuries of power, migration, intrigue, and even the birth of the Atlantic world, PAYNE's work is a perfect example of how deep you can go. Maybe it'll spark you to look into your own family legend, or just read a bit more about medieval history or genealogy. Either way, just remember, what you hear today is one historian's interpretation, and the truth is always just a little elusive. Tune in next time for more deep dives. Thanks for joining me, and keep questioning.